Body Bags with Joseph Scott Morgan. We live in a world nowadays where it seems that there are people with, I don't know, little or no talent, make a lot of money for doing nothing more than displaying those gifts that the sweet Lord gave them. Today, we're going to go back and visit a case that we covered all the way back in 2022, and it has to do with one such person, a person that wanted to live her best life, I guess, and display those things that God gave her. Maybe it's the only asset she had, but I do know this. I've seen video of this individual striking the man in her life over and over again inside of an elevator. And oh, that man, by the way, wound up being a homicide victim. And he's been dead now for near about 4 years. And still, no appearances in court to get this thing adjudicated. We're going to go back in time and also in the present a little bit because there's new information regarding the Courtney Clenney case. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bags. Brother Dave, you and I were reflecting on this. We do so many cases. This thing popped up in the news, this article that I caught wind of, actually popped up yesterday, I think on Fox. And I had to revisit it because I'm thinking, I'll put it to you this way. If you've ever been in your vehicle and you've been stuck in mud and, you keep putting it in reverse and, you put it in gear and you're hitting the accelerator, you turn the wheel, and you wind up, you're in the same damn spot you were in to begin with. You think, what else do I need to do? I guess I'm going to have to call a tow truck. Right. To this point, metaphorically, they have not called a tow truck. We're still stuck in the mud down there in South Florida with a case that is yet to be adjudicated after all of this time. And I think the most surprising bit to all of this is that the defense still has, they're saying, we've got 9 more depositions to go, Dave, in this case.
Okay, first of all, the case is the OnlyFans. Courtney Taylor was her name on OnlyFans. If you don't know what that is as a site, go look it up. But Courtney Clenney is the woman's real name. And when this case first came out, by the way, it was pitched to police as self-defense. And a stabbing by Courtney Clenney of her boyfriend, Christian Obumseli. And he was a cryptocurrency investor, okay? He was living a good life financially. He was really making some inroads. Joe, you mentioned how some people can really make money off of just whatever physical attributes God has blessed you with or the ones you can pay for. And that's what Courtney Clenney / Courtney Taylor was doing on OnlyFans. They were living South Florida, upscale, high-rise penthouse.
Yeah.
We're talking the Green Acres. When Ava Gabor is looking over, Central Park, not on the farm, and Courtney is from the farm. So, what happened is this is a domestic violence death. Courtney Clenney has been charged with homicide, 2nd-degree homicide. She claimed self-defense, and I will tell you this, guys. When I first heard the story, you're only hearing just this one thing, okay? A fight breaks out between a couple. In fear, she grabs a knife and just throws it to back him away. And the knife inadvertently strikes him in the chest and he dies. Well, okay. You can believe that if that's the only thing that happened. We had a 911 call, Joe, and police body cam video. I am so glad departments have invested in body cam for police. It protects police officers in many ways from being accused of wrongdoing, but it also shows what somebody who claims they are a victim, what they're acting like, and it locks them into a story. Y'all know why police sit down with the party and have you make a statement. They have you write it out. And oftentimes they'll do the interview. Hey, Joe, tell me what happened in your own words. And they make notes and they write it out. And then they hand it back to you and say, Joe, hey, take a look at your statement and correct anything you don't see that's right. Well, what happens is while they're writing out the statement, if they suspect you, they go ahead and add in a few things that are wrong. If you said at 8:22 p.m., I did X, Y, Z, they might write 8:26 p.m. Then later on, there's another something, they put 4 or 5 of those in there and that looks right. And you sign it. And then you're going, well, now we got you lying. It's really that simple. And with Courtney Clenney, once we saw all of the surveillance footage, oh my goodness, Joseph Scott Morgan, this victim was not a victim at all. Oh, wait a minute. Yeah, she's not an alleged victim. She's an alleged killer right now. But she was shown to be the aggressor. And the real victim is the guy who's dead, her live-in boyfriend, Christian Obumseli.
Yeah, and apparently he also went by the name Toby. And I got to tell you, Dave, listen, the world that we live in now and that we occupy, it's easy for people to say anything about you when they don't perceive themselves to being recorded. But just going back in time after the fact, when I got to see the imagery from this event that took place that I mentioned just a second ago in the elevator, and it's kind of a bird's eye view. As a matter of fact, just so our friends know, if you're facing the door in an elevator, okay, the kind of the fisheye lens on this thing would be back and to your left, over your left shoulder. And so it's looking down on the two of them inside of this elevator. And let me tell you something about Christian. He's a big man. I mean, and I don't mean like morbidly obese. I'm talking about, this is a guy that takes care of himself. He works out. Yeah. I mean, he is jacked, Looking at the video, you can see her striking him over and over and over. And guess what he does? He never raises his hand to her to knock her down. As a matter of fact, he is constantly, and we've all been on an elevator before. Nowadays you never know who you're going to get on an elevator with, right? And so these two know one another. Of course, I bet if there had been another person on the elevator, she wouldn't have acted out like this. How much you won't bet? I'm
with you, and I didn't even think about his size, Joe, because you're right.
Yeah, it's like flicking a flea with him. He's massive.
Constantly
and
breaking.
He continues to put distance between himself and her. All the while, she continues, looking at the video, to attack this man. I mean, she's striking him, slapping him, doing all this stuff. And, I've always held to this, is that if you're willing to do this, even though it's not really public, but it is a public, you never know who would walk in through that door. Right. If you're willing to do it, what are you going to do in your house?
Oh, buddy.
What are you going to do to somebody? And according to the police, it went next level, man.
Well,
it went next level.
The thing, Joe, as I mentioned, Courtney Clenney is the one that called 911. And when you listen to it, she is, concerned. She's upset. She's of course claiming that she's the victim and that she only did things in self-defense. But the investigation started from that. And to be honest with you, you mentioned that that Toby was a guy who was muscular, a large guy, strong. And you've got this damsel in distress, Police are going to listen to what they're hearing, but they're not going to just believe it all. And in this particular case, as the investigation went on, it didn't take long before law enforcement started hearing from friends who said, they were in a volatile relationship, but Courtney is the one who was the aggressor most of the time. Certainly not always, and I'm just leaving it at that. You guys can look into this yourself. But the bottom line is the story that Courtney Clenney was trying to sell was not backed up by facts or by friends or by family in and around their place in Florida. Now, there was even a point in time where her parents got involved, and it was one of these little sad tangents that takes place. After Toby was killed, and the police were investigating it as a justifiable homicide. Is that what it's called in defense? Or you kill somebody in defense or whatever? But
yeah, it can be justifiable.
Right.
I mean, it can be justifiable, yeah.
But Courtney had left town. She left South Florida and went to her parents' home in Texas. And while she was there, I remember covering this on Nancy Grace's show because it was like, is it a model or is it Bigfoot? Because we have a story of Courtney Clenney in her parents' neighborhood. Okay, she leaves Florida, goes to Texas, and she's staying at her folks' house. And she's walking down the street. She's had a few adult beverages, and she talks to this teenage guy saying she's in fear. Hey, just would you walk me home? Walk me to my house. And then she's like hitting on him, sexually aggressive towards this teenage boy. And she's like, just kiss me or whatever. And he's like, no, thank you. And so then when he won't do what she wants, she threatens to burn his house down. And the police get called for that one. So that's what happened in the weeks following the death of Toby. And then Courtney took off to Florida. Investigation is underway. What do? Go into rehab. The Alec Murdaugh solution. And that's where she was arrested. Once the investigation round everything up and they're like, okay, we got video, we got audio, we got all of these interviews from everybody who knows them. And Courtney's the aggressor? Okay.
Yeah. I think at one point in time, she wound up in Hawaii.
Yeah, that's where they arrested her. She was in rehab in Hawaii.
Yeah. And so, listen, the proof, as they say, is in fact in the pudding. And Dave, you had mentioned the cams that the cops had. Mm-hmm. And there's one image that's quite striking to me. And I think it was local news down in Miami that, you talked about, this fancy schmancy penthouse thing. And this thing is gorgeous. Sure. I mean, it's beautiful. I don't know what the monthly hit on this thing is, but it's more than you and I got. All right. And so
I know I want to become an OnlyFans model. What do I have to do?
No. Let's don't go down that road. Please. I beg you. Por favor. There's this image, the still image of her that you can see through one of those windows.
Right.
And she is seated in that image against, I think, on the floor against the wall, and she's got blood on her.
Right.
But I got to tell you, when you see the videography from the interior of this penthouse, it's bathed in blood. So, Dave, the article or articles that I was referencing came from our friends at Fox, and also, secondly, from Court TV. We do a lot of these cases, so a lot of the imagery kind of disappears, right? For me at least. There's no way. My brain is just not big enough. I can't contain everything. And so you need sometimes, and that's cool. That's like crime scene stuff too, right? It's not too much different.
Yeah.
Because one of the reasons that we take notes, we write reports, and we take photos at scenes is so that, we can contextualize what has happened and what is no longer there, but it's also to refresh our memory. And one of the things that really stands out that came out in the Fox report was that they actually had this knife that was used in this attack. They actually had the image of the knife on the floor. And I was quite struck by that because suddenly I remembered how bloody an affair this was. And if you guys want to know, this knife itself, it's a longer knife. It's not a steak knife, but it has a serrated edge on it. I guess, to say it's not a steak knife is one thing, but you could use it, I guess, to cut a steak with because it is serrated and the blade is tapered. It comes to a very sharp point, but the whole thing is metallic. It's got a pitted metallic handle on it too. The whole thing is silver.
Would you explain something for those who don't know? What do you mean when you say serrated?
Yeah. So serrated, the way I like to describe a serrated knife is if you think about the edge of a saw blade, and if you look at the side of a saw blade really carefully, it looks like a mountain range that's kind of got peaks and valleys to it. Okay. With an actual serrated edge, it kind of works like a saw blade does. However, those little peaks and valleys, they're connected by this kind of scalloping that goes on. So you've got this kind of curved edge that's in between each peak. And so when it works really well when you're trimming meat, okay, you sat down and you have a steak. By the way, big shout out. Maybe they'll give us a sponsorship. Took my wife to Peter Luger's, which is a dream I've always had in Brooklyn. I've never been able to go. There's a 6-month waiting list to go. They had one where we were staying in Las
Vegas?
In Las Vegas at CrimeCon. We got in and got a table in 20 minutes, and it was incredible.
Wow.
And I used a serrated knife there.
Okay, let me ask you this, because I know you're into weapons.
Yeah.
The serrated edge on a knife, was that originally used as a weapon of war?
That is an excellent question. Something I'll have to research. I would imagine that it has some kind of utility. It's like, okay, I'll give you, for instance, every hunting weapon, every major long arm that we have in the U.S. that people might be familiar with. Most notably, we've heard about this in the Charlie Kirk case, is the 30-06, right? Well, 30-06 is the same round that was used famously in World War I. Okay. And so a lot of weapons of war, a lot of instruments that we have nowadays, they've got their utility, going back to military utility. And so it transfers into the civilian world. The 30-06 is an excellent hunting round. I would imagine that there are so many different types of ancient weapons out there. There's no way you can convince me there's not one that has a serrated edge.
And that's what I was thinking.
And it really, the thing about it is, it's something that does not require, and here's the utility, it's something that does not require you to sharpen it.
Really?
Okay, because whether it's a dull serrated edge or sharp serrated edge, it still has utility. Whereas if a straight edge, you have to stone it, as they call, or like with a straight razor, it has to be stropped, on a leather strop.
Wow.
And many times when you stone and you strop things, you're not necessarily, people think they're putting an edge on something. Actually, they're taking the bend out of the blade, because the blade gets kind of a wavy nature to it. So you actually put it kind of back into line where it was originally milled. So with a serrated edge, this is the other thing about a serrated edge as far as a weapon goes. Because of the nature of that scalloped edge, it can do more destruction when it enters into tissue, as opposed to a neat, finely defined edge on, say, like a butcher knife. All right. Because you're disrupting the tissue more. You've got this wave that's going down the long axis of this thing. It's got these little peaks. So with every bit of destruction that you're doing, if you look at it from a surgical perspective, where the stuff has to be repaired by some doctor that gets they're going to have to pay closer attention, because those little vessels that are contained at a microscopic level where you're trying to stop the bleeding, it's going to make it all the more difficult, because you're tearing up more tissue, right? Maybe a bad analogy is it's kind of like a hollow point round. A hollow point round kind of deploys. It has like a claw on it, when it strikes, and it's ripping those little vessels and destroying, cavitating that tissue, as opposed to, say, ball ammunition that's going through, kind of is more smooth. At any rate.
And I didn't mean to get you off on that. It's just,
no, that's okay. We can talk about it all day long.
I know, because if I don't ask, I'm not going to know, man. And I've heard, I've heard people talk about the serrated edge of this, and all I'm thinking of, whatever knife is in the drawer that I use to cut meat, that's the knife. I don't know what it is. unless it's a Ginsu, because I know I can cut open my tin can, my cinder block, and my ham.
Yeah. What was the old adage in Japan? The hand could be used like a knife. And I don't know if I've got a couple of Japanese friends. I've never asked them if they own a Ginsu knife. Probably not. I think it's strictly an American thing.
That
But yeah, and pocket fisherman. But yeah, you think about the utility of this, and it can be weaponized. And this goes back to something else we've talked about on body bags, and that is weapons of opportunity, right?
Oh, yeah.
It's not like she went out and, I don't know, bought a K-bar.
Right.
Okay. Or a Rambo hunting knife, right? It's a weapon of convenience that is within arm's reach. And a lot of domestic violence events that you see will have this kind of theme to it. That it literally was a candlestick, or it literally to bludgeon somebody, or it was a hammer, or it was a kitchen knife. I remember, and I still use this case in instruction as a forensics professor. And again, this was a case of domestic violence that I worked years and years ago, and I used the images to teach my kids. I had a lady that her husband he would come home drunk every day, and he would beat her with a belt. And she had kids, and he would do this in front of the kids. One evening, he beat her with a belt using the buckle end. And he passed out on the sofa face down. She went to the silverware drawer, pulled out a steak knife that is not the best quality, climbed on his back. He's laying in a prone position, and she buried that thing in his back 9 times before it broke off. And I've got this image of this knife that's probably broken halfway up the blade, and it's protruding, through here. And you can see, and the thing about it is, when you examine these injuries from a scalloped or a serrated edge, you can, when it's removed and you look at it very, very carefully in a clinical sense, you can actually see this pattern develop. That's one of the ways. Say, for instance, if you come up to a scene and it looks as though you have multiple stab wounds, but you don't have a weapon, right? Okay. First off, you get the dimensions of it. What's it at its greatest width? What's the greatest width of it? Okay. Well, if you've got a steak knife, which everybody thinks of a classic steak knife that you can buy at any store, maybe 3/4 of an inch in width at its greatest point, as opposed to something that might be 2 inches, might have a smooth edge. But in this case, this thing's really wide that Clenney allegedly used, and it's serrated. But what she's saying here relative to how this thing was used, Dave, is the big rub. But in this whole thing, because it doesn't make sense. It didn't make sense to me. I was not going to bite on it.
I remember asking you about it. I remember when I saw it, because she claims that he was the aggressor, that she was defending herself, and that she threw the knife from 10 feet away.
At a range of 10 feet.
Now, how hard would you have to throw a conventional steak knife, Joe, to get it to penetrate anything from 10 feet?
Well, okay, first off, it's not the velocity at which you throw it. It's the manner in which it's thrown. And also, and I urge all of our friends, don't believe anything I say. Go research it yourself, okay?
Just not on a friend or relative.
Not on a friend. No, go read about it or watch a video on YouTube. There are throwing knives, and many of you guys know that, because I know that some of you guys out there are interested in this sort of thing. There are throwing knives. Well, those knives that you see that are actually thrown, they are balanced. They have specific specs, okay? Because if you're going to throw a knife, you have to be able to have the touch to know how this thing is going to rotate and to try to get it on the target and even professional knife throwers, if they're targeting an area, say if they're throwing this thing in the heat of battle, which, by the way, I have never, ever worked a homicide related to a thrown knife. Just because Joe Scott Morgan hasn't worked one Doesn't mean that they don't exist.
Right.
I'm sure that they do. Millions of people have died violently. It has to have happened. At least just out of sheer dumb luck, somebody would have thrown something. Now, I've had other things thrown at people and they killed them, but never certainly not a kitchen knife.
Right.
And that's what kind of stuck in my mind, Dave. You were talking about how much force would it take,
Right.
or velocity would you have to have? Well, the thing about it is, Dave, I've had projectiles shot at people that didn't go the same depth that this thing went. This thing went 3 inches. And not only did it go 3 inches in to Christian's body, it also penetrated an area immediately adjoining one of the most robust bony areas in your body, right here, your clavicle, your collarbone that's right here. If everybody will just palpate it's around, you can find it right here. I've had mine broken. I broke mine when I was a child. Many people break their collarbones. This thing actually went beneath the collarbone and went into the subclave artery, which is an absolute lethal shot. He would have, in order for him to have survived this, there would have had to have been a group of cardiothoracic surgeons standing by there with a kit to open him up, tie this thing off, because this used to be, not so much anymore, but this used to be like if you were going to, in nursing, in the medical sense, they would put in what was called a central line. Like if you had to have medication running through you, they do it other places now, but the subclave, because you could deliver drugs really quickly right here by pushing it. You put a lock in here, an injectable lock where you could push drugs in and the uptake would be really quick. This thing is all married up with these structures in the neck that supply the brain, of course, going up and back and this sort of thing. And it's an artery. So this is one of the reasons you saw so much blood deposition at the scene. It's an arterial strike. So when this thing impacts in there, you're striking a rather robust artery, and she nicks this thing. Okay. I swear, Dave, I have a memory of being able to, there was a 911 call. I swear I think I heard him in the background or something. And he's got the dwindles really, which makes sense because as you're losing a volume of blood, it's this kind of sleepiness that begins to take over until you're at the point where, and you'll have people that do this, they go through this, they'll get nauseated, sometimes they'll vomit, and they're running out of oxygenated blood because it's pouring out everywhere. And this would have been a bloody scene.
But not something that could have been accomplished as described by Courtney Clenney.
No, not. I can't feature that in any world. I don't know. Maybe the defense has another explanation. I got to tell you, when this thing finally does go to trial, whenever that is, because now we're 4 years on, right? Am I doing my math?
Yeah, it happened April of 2022, and
so we're beyond that
beyond
point
4 years
now.
now.
Yeah, so when we get to that point, and I'm not saying this tongue in cheek, I truly want to know, because I could have sworn that they had consulted somebody out there, or somebody has at this point in time, that throws knives. Now, are they going to parade this person up on the stand to talk about the utility of throwing knives and their level of lethality? Because, we can sit here all day long and talk about throwing knives that are meant to be thrown. But what about an inexperienced 30-year-old OnlyFans model from a range of 10 feet throwing this knife at a very robust boyfriend that's so well muscled and built like an Adonis? What are the odds that she's going to strike pay dirt? So I know I've said it, and you've said it several times, as we're having this chin wag, as they say, Dave, over this. But this thing has not come to fruition yet. And one of the reasons I had mentioned this and what really caught my eye was that they said they being the defense in this case still have 9 more depositions to go. And I'm thinking, good Lord, how many people do you need to have a conversation with about
all of
this
them?
case?
If they're going to get Courtney Clenney, well, if you know her from OnlyFans, Courtney Taylor, her real name, Courtney Clenney. The reason they're having to do so many interviews, Joe, and the reason they're having to string this out is because the defense is trying to claim this happened in self-defense. But after the investigation into the relationship, law enforcement determined that the couple was involved in a toxic and violent relationship between the two of them. Fighting was a regular part of their life together. And it really comes down to this incident, because you can't claim you did it in self-defense when the physical evidence doesn't match up. And so the interviews are to back up the story she's trying to sell. Yeah, because still she is allegedly a killer. At this point, hey, man, we've seen bigger fish, get away with things. And I'm not saying that she will. I'm just saying based on what we know, based on the video that you have referenced a couple of times, the elevator video, the police camera video. By the way, there are still stories about where they lived in Texas, Courtney and Toby. They lived in Austin, Texas before moving to Miami. And while they were there, police were regularly called to their apartment complex for violent interaction between the two. So what the defense is trying to do is to get enough evidence on their side so that they can now claim Toby, who is not here to defend himself because he's dead at his girlfriend's hands, they need to overwhelm the jury with all of these people who will say Courtney was the victim. That's why it's going to take so long. But 4 years in, Joe, I know that justice delayed is not necessarily justice denied, but can you imagine what it must be like for Toby's family to witness this? Now, the family is claiming that Courtney is treated differently because she's a pretty white girl and that her boyfriend was a big black guy. And they've actually come out and said that. Well, 4 years in, Joe, I don't know why it's taken so long to get to court, to get to trial yet. I don't know. But at some point, somebody's going to have to explain those knife wounds. And if they call you, holy moly, man. Joe explained this to me. What it would take for that knife to do what it did from where she claimed she was. And I'm telling you, Harry Houdini would come back during a seance before that would happen again.
Okay. Well, I think the biggest tell here is, we've already kind of addressed what the level of lethality of this thing is. All right. Where it has nicked this vessel. But Dave, here's the real problem that they run into. She is significantly smaller than the victim. Okay. When the height comparison alone, there are several images, okay, of them out there as a couple. I beg you, please, friends, go look at them. This insult that this fellow sustained, right aspect, adjacent to the collarbone. Dave, this thing has got a downward track. Okay, so not only,
Okay.
Yeah, like swinging from above to below. We're not talking about a slice where you're dragging a blade like this. We're talking about a motion that would have to be like this, downward trajectory, and you're burying it 3 inches in. And when you bury this thing in him, okay, and you withdraw it, you're going to have a copious amount of blood that'll be pouring out. I think my big question is at what point in time was this knife withdrawn? Because there's an old thought to this, that if someone is stabbed, right, and the weapon is still indwelling. And this also applies, believe it or not, to impalements as well. If you can leave the object in place, okay, there's a higher likelihood, you got a better chance at surviving because you've got a blockage. So if you withdraw this thing, makes sense, right?
Yeah, it does.
So if you withdraw this thing, you've got blood that's now pulsing out.
Wow.
And we do this in the morgue, but for a different reason. Like if I have a case where someone has been stabbed and a knife has been left in, I've had people impaled on rebar, fence post, all these trees.
Wow.
You get up into those areas, and I've actually had firefighters come out and, like with a piece of rebar, I've had them cut it so that it's manageable. I can put the body into the body bag and I don't take it out. We x-ray it with the place in place. I remember a kid that car ran through a bunch of debris that had been yard trimmings and that sort of thing. And he had a holly, holly trees.
Yeah.
They had a holly tree that had a trunk on this thing that was 4 feet in diameter, is how old it was. And they cut this thing down. They left the branches on. The branch came in through one of the side panels of the van. He was right in the back, and went through diagonally. And we left that in. So,
oh my gosh,
you want to leave these things in place if you're dealing with the living. You want to leave them in place if you're dealing with the dead. Either way, okay.
Wow.
And that way you can kind of tell the story from that perspective. However, if it has been removed, it's laying on the floor. One of the things you're also going to be able to tell at the scene, and I don't know if these people they're deposing, if they've got a crime scene reconstructionist that's going to be involved in this, because these blood patterns are going to tell the tale. I talked about the arterial nature and deposition. Most people have heard this construct within blood spatter interpretation that talks about arterial spray, histamine-like, it's pumping out. You can see these movements, passive droppings like you see with the Nancy Guthrie case, where it's just kind of free falling, aspirate stuff like you see in Nancy Guthrie, as well as expirate that you see in her case. You also saw it in Travis Alexander. I could go on and on and on. Are they going to have a person like that they're deposing that's going to sit on the stand? I also believe that in this case, Dave, because you got a knife involved, you're not going to need a firearms expert. You're going to need a tool mark expert. So you think about some of the people that might be on this list, tool mark expert that's independent of somebody, obviously from the crime lab. They're going to be working for the defense. They're going to talk about the nature of the instrument itself, what the level of lethality it could have. But before you can do that, you have to describe what's the purpose of this knife. What's it used for? Okay. But that's a dangerous trap to walk into, because this knife, I can tell you, even though it might feel really good in your hand when you're using it to cut up your pork chops or, your steak or whatever it is you're cutting, that don't mean it has any utility as a throwing weapon. Okay. It doesn't. It's not intended to be made for that purpose. So that's a very dangerous area for the defense to get into if they're talking about forensic viability and utility here.
Wow.
And I'm trying to think of anybody else that they could be waiting to depose, unless they're going to be deposing other states' witnesses to bring them in and have them, be spoken to, about their conclusions and any of the testing that was done.
Well, Joe, so they've got domestic violence charges with Courtney Clenney. You've got it in Florida, you've got it in Texas, and they were in Las Vegas one time, and she got arrested on a domestic violence charge there. So the defense is going to be pulling a lot of things together to say that she was defending herself, that she was the victim all along. They're going to have a lot to defend. She's already told the story that they're stuck with. She doesn't get to change it now. She claims she killed him by throwing a knife from 10 feet away. That's her story, and they have to stick to it. So everybody they're talking to now is trying to find a way that'll justify it. And all I'm thinking, the only time actually, other than a Bruce Lee movie, Kevin Costner in The Bodyguard. Remember when he's throwing knives? And it's a great scene because he misses the first few times. It's like going everywhere. And then he throws, and nails it. And it's like, those were throwing knives. And you could look at those and they were balanced. All I could think of is, how do you get away from that? But this is a steak knife I got in my drawer, Joe. And
well, you have to keep in mind, Kevin Costner's a trained assassin. I don't know if you're aware of that. But yeah. And so, no, really though, your point is well taken, Dave. How are you going to explain this away? I tell you another interesting part, and you've already mentioned this about this kid out of Texas that she's speaking to going down the street, right?
Yep.
And, this is more of a behavioral thing, but, behavior is all part of this. Certainly terminal behavior, when you're looking at what happened to Christian, I'll be very interested to see if they drag this individual. What if they bring that Dallas or the Dallas area officer that handled that case?
Oh, wow.
They bring them down to Miami. And I've seen that happen before, where somebody's got this histrionics of being unstable and these sorts of things. I've seen them bring other people in. It's an interesting pairing, I have to say. From the perspective of where this thing could go. Because to this point, I guess the reason my interest is piqued about the destination is that to this point, we haven't gone anywhere yet. We're still waiting. And Christian's family is still waiting. There are many people that want answers. And I hope that the delay won't be too much longer, because it seems as though 4 years is quite enough time. We're going to keep you posted about this case because it's just so bloody bizarre, and we'll see which way the wind blows with it. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bag.